Two friends, Alan Dale and Jerry Carew, who grew up just a few streets apart in St. John's East End, have been separated by Canada's geography for 3 decades. They came together virtually during the pandemic to chat about like-minded interests. Alan lives in PEI and Jerry in Newfoundland. Thriving in remoteness has been a common theme for both of them during the pandemic. Gale Force Wins, the podcast is the result.
Well, hello, folks. We are back on Gale Force Wins. With me today, as always, is Alan Dale from PEI. Alan, how are you this morning?
I couldn't be any better, Jerry. Covered in snow here on Prince Edward Island. How about you?
I'm covered in snow as well. We also have a guest that we're going to get into in a second, but she is on PEI as well. Is it proper to say on PEI? Is that the correct terminology?
So, Jerry, people on PEI refer to it as the island, as if there were no other islands. It's the island, and I believe that you are on Prince Edward Island.
Okay. Well, I'm on Newfoundland. And as I said, there's a raging snowstorm hitting us right now, and it's a massive storm. But anyway, enough with the weather. We have Deirdre Ayre on with us. Deirdre, you go by Beep, of course, and you can probably tell our listeners why you go by that name. I've heard the story, and it's kind of cool. But I just wanted to say that I'm excited to have you on board. What you represent in terms of the companies that you and your brother have built have brought employment to Atlantic Canada. And Alan and I talk a lot about thriving in remoteness. I think the conversation will get into the details, but as far back as 2006, you brought a business to PEI, expanded into Newfoundland, and it's just an exciting business. I've gamed a little bit, not a lot, but I can tell you my children, my oldest is 17, he is immersed in it. So what you've done with Other Ocean is really neat. And so I'd just like to ask you to introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, well, I'm Deirdre Ayre, and more commonly known as Beep by many. I pretty much spend my time on both perfect islands, straddling the two. Right now, I'm on PEI as well, and hoping to get home sometime soon, but not prepared to isolate anymore. I've done it a few times.
Yes. So, Alan, PEI, you made a comment about not necessarily knowing that there was a thriving gaming industry. Just tell us that quick story, and then we can get into it with Beep.
I got to go back a bit. Why Beep? I need to know why people call you Beep first.
Well, my dad was at McGill in the mid '60s. I was born at that time. My brother was a little bit older, and he was. Well, there's a couple of stories, and I was only a baby, so I just have to go with what I'm told. But I used to say it quite a bit. That noise will stop. It's the coffee maker. I used to say Beep a lot when I was learning to speak, and when I would want someone's attention, and particularly my father, while he was writing his thesis, my crib was in his den that he would study in, or in his study, and I would beep when I wanted his attention. But also, we were getting ready to move back to Newfoundland, and there were a bunch of boxes and things around the flat or the apartment, and my brother would draw headlights on the boxes, and he'd put me in and push me around, and I would make my beeping noise. And I guess Deirdre doesn't roll off the tongue that easily, so somehow it became my name.
There you go. That's a great story. So, born in Montreal, yeah?
Actually, I was born in Newfoundland. It was come home year 1966. So I think my dad stayed in Montreal. My mother got home, and I was born there. But spent the first couple of years of my life in Montreal. Yep.
Fantastic. So Beep, you're in the gaming industry, and I've always been fascinated that industry is thriving on Prince Edward Island. Prince Edward Island, in many respects, Newfoundland. We really rely heavily on our traditional industries, agriculture, fisheries, tourism, those type things. And yet I was on a flight probably a dozen years ago, and I was seated next to a gentleman who was in the gaming industry. He was telling me all about it, and I had to tell you, I was fascinated about it. I myself am not a gamer, but like Jerry's son is as well. So I'm fascinated by that industry, but more so than that, I'm fascinated where the gamification of things can take us. So I often look at things through the lens of a gamer to see that how this could be gamified. And I'm really fascinated by that whole industry. Tell us a little bit about how you found yourself on these little islands in this wonderful industry.
Yeah, well, my brother, who grew up, of course, in Newfoundland, ended up in the States for college. So, and he stayed there after that. He actually was born in the U.S. when my father was at university there before McGill. So Andrew had dual citizenship. So after he graduated from college, he decided to stay in the U.S. for a period of time. He actually he chased a girl out to California who was going out there to study law at Berkeley, and got himself out there and was, well, like I say, really just chasing him, and realized he better get a job. So it was, the late 80s, early 90s. Silicon Valley was certainly in its prime or in its heyday, and people were sort of jumping on that bandwagon. My father had owned some coin-op video game companies in Newfoundland and Labrador, and in the region, and a couple in Quebec. Andrew had some interest in taking coin-op games or he had an idea to take coin-op games to a Macintosh at the time. He ended up starting a company with some friends, and raised some money. Friends, big borrowing and stealing from friends and family, and he's the only one who actually stuck with it. Actually, the others eventually all left. They were Ivy League kids, and they all had wonderful opportunities. But Andrew really wanted to, do something on his own and have his own company. And so he had this interest. And this is kind of a fun story, being from Newfoundland, all of us. So I'll tell you this part. So Andrew needed somebody Andrew was not a programmer. He was a very smart guy, and he had a good idea, but he wasn't a programmer. And I mean, it wasn't pre-internet, but it was very early stages internet. And he was plugged in. So he went looking, and people at that time sort of had personal websites a little bit, or like some kind of pages where they might put up where they might have sort of their backgrounds and things. And certainly if you were, particularly into the computer world. And Andrew came across a guy who was he was a physicist, actually, who seemed to have the right talent, I guess, that might be able to do what Andrew had envisioned. And he reached out to this guy who was living actually in Canada. He was in Vancouver. So Andrew got the guy's phone number, reached out to him. They arranged to have a call. And when he called the guy, he said, Andrew, as an icebreaker, Andrew said, well, I'm actually, I know I'm calling from California, but I'm actually Canadian. And the guy sort of very quickly said, well, I'm not from this coast. He was living in Vancouver. And Andrew said, oh, no, well, I'm not from the West Coast either. And the guy said, yeah, not Toronto either. And Andrew said, no, I'm not from Toronto either. Anyway, the guy, of course, was from Newfoundland. Name was Jeff Avasser. He was Andrew's first hire. They had both gone to Prince of Wales Collegiate in St. John's. Jeff was a few years behind Andrew. Andrew called, on Jeff's resume was Mr. Flight, who was a very well-known past principal at Prince of Wales, and had also been Andrew's principal there. So Andrew called Mr. Flight and said, I'm interested in hiring this guy. He seems pretty smart. Mr. Flight said, well, I'd hire him, Andrew. He's the only guy who ever went to this school who's smarter than you. That was Andrew's first hire, Jeff Avasser. We're still all friends. Jeff worked for Andrew for many, many years. So anyway, that's how Andrew got started in the business. And He eventually grew that initial company, which was called Digital Eclipse Software. We still own the brand. He eventually grew that with a bunch of mergers and acquisitions into well, there were 1,000 employees actually in the US with one studio in Vancouver, the one Canadian studio in Vancouver. 11 studios, I think, about 1,000 people. So that would have been around the time that I got involved, which was in 2005, 2006. Andrew started talking to me about the possibility of maybe doing something in Atlantic Canada. I had done a bunch of small business development, although most people knew me working in marketing and entertainment, but I actually had also worked at the Y Enterprise Center in business development. I'd worked for Industry Canada doing small business development, and I also worked at Hospitality Newfoundland and Labrador in communications, but I was very, very interested in, I love tourism, but I was also just interested in watching what people were doing in small communities to make a living outside the traditional industries in Newfoundland at that time. I wouldn't call tourism a traditional industry in Newfoundland, certainly not back then. So, I had this real interest in business development. So anyway, Andrew asked me if I thought this might be a good idea, or did I think it was even possible? And I didn't. But not long after that, we were actually contacted by what is now Innovation PEI, which was called Tech PEI at that time. Right. And they offered to bring either Andrew or me to PEI to talk about the possibility of starting a gaming company. They had written a thing called Game Plan or something, some kind of a strategy. And they were going after companies trying to recruit to PEI to diversify the economy, sort of to your point. Mm-hmm. Why they picked games, I think it was just because there were a couple of young guys in that office who thought, well, God, I don't know, maybe we can do this, Right. And someone had suggested to them, they had been reaching out to all these companies who were not interested in doing it. They knew that the challenges and they weren't interested. But somebody along the way suggested that they talk to Andrew. They knew that Andrew was originally from Atlantic Canada. And so these guys reached out to him, and then Andrew put them on to me. So I wrote a business plan. I actually spoke to departments of business, let's call them that, in each Atlantic Canadian province. And I was living in Newfoundland. I had 2 small children. I really wasn't looking at coming to PEI, but I did feel that the support networks in PEI for this particular endeavor were better than what I was seeing in the other provinces. Mm-hmm. And, they had some real champions at Tech PEI and who were really interested and seemed to understand, what was going to be involved to develop it. So it was a big risk. We took that risk, and Andrew and the other owners at that time decided that they would do it. And then they asked me if I would come to PEI. I'd written the business plan, but I wasn't planning necessarily come to PEI and do it.
You didn't write yourself in.
I was a consultant. I was like, here you go.
Yeah. You didn't write yourself into the business plan.
Yeah, I did not. But anyway, I decided to do it. I was looking for change myself. And I actually, I believed in it. And I loved the idea of trying to help curb out migration and the diversification and the fact that it was young people. And I also felt that it ticked so many boxes that I knew government should be interested in, whether or not each government in each province was yet. But PEI had figured that out at that time. And I believed in it. And I moved to PEI. We started the company. It was, I can tell you about the recruitment and all the difficulties of that, but just to sort of wrap up how we got to Other Ocean, because at this point, the company was not Other Ocean. So about 6 or 8 months into this, Andrew called me one morning and said, I've now moved to PEI, as my father would say, from one fishbowl to an even smaller fishbowl. And I was a single woman with 2 young children, and I was here alone, you know, doing this thing, and made this giant leap. And my brother calls me one morning and says, "Yeah, you know, I don't know if I really want to do this anymore." And I was like,
Thanks, brother.
yeah. So he had decided to exit the original company. And this was what was super exciting. He decided that he would try and negotiate the PEI company in his deal as he left. And he did that. And so, you know, we just started off again so we had I don't know, maybe 11 or 12, less than 15 employees at that time. We rebranded as Other Ocean. We basically took it back to a family-owned and run business, you know, which was what it was when Andrew had originally started it. And we grew it from there. Within the first 2 or 3 years, we had as many as 150 people by year 3 between Newfoundland. So yeah, I mean, eventually we opened the Newfoundland. Eventually, it was only a few months later, we opened the Newfoundland studio. And then we also opened Sculpin on PEI as well, which is quality assurance business. So we do testing for other video game developers, not just ourselves, and
Yeah.
applications. Yeah. So I mean, that's really how it all started.
There's
Beep, it just seems so simple the way you explained it, but I can only imagine the amount of effort that went in. Yeah, it was just, we just did this and did that, you know.
You know, Jerry, we had such tremendous support. You know, and I mean, obviously there was some financial support, but when I came to PEI for that initial meeting, sitting at the table, like soon as I walked in the room, I mean, I thought I was coming to meet the guys from Tech PEI. I had worked in government. I knew how government worked. I knew, you know, just because you had the province there didn't mean you'd have the feds there, didn't mean you'd even have various departments there. And I knew that we needed to speak to educators. We were going to need support on training. We were going to need export support for our products. We were going to need, I mean, at this time, everything was, you know, very, very little of it was online. And so, you know, what really sold it for me was when I came to PEI and I went into that initial room. It was a snowstorm actually when I arrived, and John Eden picked me up at the airport, and we went to this first meeting, and we had a COA at the table. We had the province at the table. We had what was then the Population Secretariat at the table. There were members of faculty members from UPI. There were people from Holland College as well at the table. Everybody there to tell me how they were going to help or ask me how they could help. And I mean, I get goosebumps thinking about it because it was just the absolute red carpet, you know? I mean, it was just what we needed. We needed to know that there would be that collaborative approach. I mean, that was the day I went, you know, I got on the phone with Andrew and said, yeah, you know what, I think we might actually be able to do this, but you're going to be surprised because I am going to pick PEI as my recommendation because it was just so inviting and everybody really seemed to be on board. And yeah.
Yeah, a lot to be said for that, eh? And I have so much I'd like to unpack in that whole introduction there. I can only imagine what it must have been like in Silicon Valley at the initial stages and how fast things were moving for your brother. And that must have been exciting. And that almost sounds like the Steve Jobs kind of scenario where everything is moving fast. And as you say, and I like the term, and it's often used in some of these industries, but that he was plugged in at the time. That's really fascinating. And I'm also really intrigued by your explanation of how the province was able to immediately step up and pull all the pieces together in a very inviting fashion. And I've seen that firsthand myself here in PEI. And I often wonder why the rest of, I understand why big provinces like Ontario, Quebec can't pull all the pieces in together. I mean, they're bureaucratic and it's slow moving. Prince Edward Island uses its size to its advantage, and everybody tends to travel in the same circle as it relates to business. but I'm always amazed that I'm not sure that the other Atlantic provinces move with such agility, and I'm not sure why. I don't understand.
I would agree with you. Not in my experience, they don't. Although I would say certainly with the tech sector in Newfoundland and Labrador, the last couple of years, things have changed remarkably, but they're a little slow in coming, like really slow in coming. I think things. I think everybody understands, though, in Newfoundland and Labrador now, with the with the problems in the oil and gas sector and the need. I mean, I always joke. I'm 54 years old. I can remember being in junior high and talking about diversification of the economy. So why it's taken us so long to actually be serious about it, I'm not entirely sure, but it has taken a very long time. I mean, it's one thing to talk about it, right? It's another thing to actually put the tools and supports in place to do it. Yeah, I mean, you're right. I think a lot of it has to do with the size of PEI, but you still have to be willing, right? I mean,
100%.
you still have to be willing.
Yeah.
I think in Newfoundland and Labrador, because oil and gas was so incredibly strong, it just got all the attention.
Right.
And, some wonderful, great things have happened in the tech sector in Newfoundland and Labrador, but the supports weren't there in the early days. I mean, it was really just those entrepreneurs pushing and pushing and pushing. And then there were some champions in government who, for example, I mean, we ended up, of course, opening our studio in Newfoundland in 2007. I mean, but it was a slog compared to PEI.
Yeah.
And it's continued to be a slog, although I would say, I mean, we have wonderful talent there in that studio. I mean, our most successful original IP to date was born out of that studio. I mean, the most successful in Andrew's career.
Right.
Was born out of
was that one, Beep?
Yeah,
Sorry to
that's
get off.
Project Winter, which is doing so well right now. Yeah. I'm talking about original IP now as opposed to third-party work that we would do. I mean, obviously, projects we've worked on, like Minecraft, are enormous, but as our own IP, Project Winter is the most successful we've ever done. And I mean, that's out of the St. John's studio originally. I mean, that's where the idea was born and where the original developers were. But everyone in PEI in our studio is also working on that, on updates, and we're moving from platform and all that stuff, doing cross-platform stuff. So everyone is working on that project right now.
Beep, you speak to finding a champion, and that's how I tend to do business. And when I'm working for a client and we're trying to make connections, I always strive to find a champion on both sides of the equation. And I find that if you can find somebody to champion it, and they seem to provide that engine to move things through the various channels, and they're so very important. So I think that's a very important piece to pick up on. The other thing I'd like for you to talk a little bit about is, because you're spanning a couple of Atlantic provinces here, do you see that maybe sometimes we stovepipe ourselves as Atlantic Canadian provinces, and that we would be much stronger if we worked together on things as an Atlantic region? Do you see a room in there for some form of collaboration?
Certainly the federal government would like us to be all one, wouldn't they? I'm sort of two minds with that. Certainly some kind of economic collaboration, or maybe more so than we do, I think would certainly be very worthwhile. I think the Maritimes operates much more so that way. I mean, Newfoundland and Labrador has such a different history, and frankly, to me, the people are quite a bit different, culturally. I don't know. I mean, I know people from outside wouldn't see it that way, but I think for those of us who are from Newfoundland and Labrador, we don't have that connection and history to the Maritimes, and there's certainly close connections that I think have developed really over the last decade, a couple of decades, I suppose, but far more so. But if you look back at the history of Newfoundland and Labrador, it's not that connected to the Maritimes, right? I mean, it was more to the northeastern U.S. and to Europe, and so you can't force these things, I don't think,
Yeah.
And
No.
so, I mean, I guess any group coming together, if they can collaborate, there certainly could be economic benefit, but Newfoundland is a little bit of a different beast, I think.
And that's very true. I mean, of course, we're all three Newfoundlanders. Two of us live in Prince Edward Island, interestingly enough. But you're right. There's certainly different cultures here between. And you're right. Many people from the outside looking in would say we're crazy, but there's definitely a different culture in Prince Edward Island.
And Newfoundland and Labrador has, enormous challenges because of its size.
Mm-hmm.
Small population, whereas
right.
The Maritimes is such a smaller geographic area and more friendly geographic area.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know.
I'm always fascinated, and I think I'd look at things like, we'll take tourism for example. I mean, if you were to look at our region of the world, it is pretty spectacular. I mean, what you can visit and see in Newfoundland, and then juxtapose that against the beaches and things in Prince Edward Island and the remote locations of New Brunswick and the coastline in Nova Scotia. I mean, it is a fascinating part of the world. And I look at tourism commercials and I look at tourism holistically, and we're all competing against each other. It's like Newfoundland's competing against PEI, and we're all competing for the same people. And I often thought to myself, if we could just combine our effort, and especially during these challenging times of COVID, how do we rebound from this? To me, like the whole Atlantic region is primed to be working together on this type of initiative. And I often found that we were very stovepiped in our approach. But you're right, we face very different challenges for sure in each of our little areas here. But I just can't help to think, I look at those Newfoundland tourism commercials and I'm quite drawn to Newfoundland. And then I think about how Prince Edward Island could contribute to the whole tourism in the region. And to me, I think we'd be stronger together than we are working apart.
Yeah, I think it depends. And I mean, I've been away from tourism for many, many years, but I know back in the day when I was involved, I don't know, Jerry, if you know from your marketing background, but I mean, a lot of the tourism dollars in Newfoundland are quite a bit different than the tourism dollars that come into the Maritimes. Now, whether that's because they've been marketed differently or whatever, I don't know, but my understanding is that those that go to Newfoundland and Labrador tend to come from different areas than those that are going into the Maritimes or traveling around through the Maritimes. So I don't know if that's because of how they're marketed to, or if they're marketed to because they're different. I don't know. Marketed differently, yeah.
Jerry, I'm dominating. You got questions here? Because I got a dozen.
Well, Beep, it's interesting. Your candor around the government in Newfoundland is interesting to me. You were a little critical, and that, you know what, I appreciate that, because if we're not critical, then we're never going to improve. It's astounding to me, though, that we still have this situation going on, and to listen to you talk.
Yeah.
Right? Well, to listen to you talk about PEI, maybe you said it's improved, but I just wish that we could move quicker. And do you think that we have here in Newfoundland?
Well, I mean, to Alan's point earlier, when we first sort of got onto this particular topic, I have often said in various advocacy roles that I've been involved in or sitting at the table that for a place with the population of Newfoundland and Labrador we should be able to do better when it comes to the collaborative approach. I have to blame it on size. Geographical size, I guess, or perhaps we're a pretty stubborn bunch too, so maybe we don't work well together. I don't know, but I really do think that I mean, oil and gas is great for so many reasons, but I really do think, like, PEI didn't have an oil and gas, right? Like, I mean, oil and gas was massive. The companies that were involved were, you know, are huge corporations. I'm sure they demanded a tremendous amount of attention from government departments. So I think there are reasons why, but there has been a remarkable change in the last few years. And you know, I do think a lot of it is because of the issues around oil and gas, because of the drop, and also, you know, climate change and all those factors. But I really do feel it has gotten a lot better, Jerry. Like, you know, and even with the educational institutions too, we've had a lot more cooperation and collaboration there. Some of the issues, though, that I feel will be a problem, even though everyone's grabbing hold of the tech sector, and hopefully we will be able to push through and meet the demand for workers and the various things that we need to happen. You know, there's a lot of poaching between the companies, which is because of the shortage of skilled workers. I would hope that the companies that are in the position to do that, because they have deep pockets, would think about what they're doing to the startups and to the smaller companies, and that they would do more outreach through immigration. And I mean, that's what we did, you know, and it worked for us. But it takes a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of commitment to that approach. And it's, you know, it can be expensive, but those companies have the money to do it. So, you know, there should be a long-term strategy to put as much. There should be a long-term strategy for education. There should be a short-term strategy for immigration, and companies need to commit to it too, and not be poaching from each other, because it's incredibly difficult for the smaller guys to you know, put out a quality product if they're constantly having their senior staff being lured away.
Right. So that's a great point, Beeb. Speak to me a little bit about, and I know that you're involved with some of the academic institutions to support the growth of your own company and the like, and beyond. Speak to the agility of our academic institutions to respond to the needs of industry like this.
Yeah, I've noticed a big difference in that too over the years. I'll go back to PEI at first. PEI was quite good from the beginning, from my perspective, compared to Newfoundland and Labrador. But again, you know, you're talking about a university, you know, with whatever 4,000 people compared to 30,000 or what have you, right? So I'm not sure those exact numbers, by the way, but I mean, it's something like that.
Yeah,
so
we get the point.
You know, it was easier to affect change on PEI, and I would say the same with Holland College. You know, they were just remarkably good at sitting at the table and speaking to industry, and also understood, because ours is you know, people love to talk about how new our industry is, and it's, you know, whatever it is, 40 years old, but yeah, I guess it's relatively new. But they really understood the need to have people from the industry engaged, not just in the curriculum development, but in the instruction too.
Right.
And, you know, our industry changes so quickly, trends happen so fast, and you really need to have people with a real understanding of that. And so again, I mean, many of our staff, well, in fact, the two senior instructors at Holland College in the video game design program are former employees of ours. And our chief technical officer teaches modules at UPEI.
Right.
and has. That was sort of all part of our approach. It was all in our business plan, you know, that we would recruit highly skilled. We didn't know if they would come from other parts of Canada or whether we'd have to use immigration. We had to use immigration. That's a whole other thing about the bias in the rest of Canada to come into Atlantic Canada. But so we, you know, immigration was the route that we ended up going. But when I was hiring those people, I wouldn't just look for the skill set that we needed to complete a project. I also spoke a lot to those applicants about their interest in mentoring and teaching, and whether, I didn't know at the time whether they'd end up working at, you know, or teaching modules. I mean, I didn't know, but I knew they had to be of a frame of mind where they would work with a disproportionate amount of juniors, let's put it that way, because I felt strongly that we needed to hire from the local workforce too.
Right.
But the kids didn't have, I say kids because it was quite a lot of young people at the time. They weren't getting that type of instruction, right? So they didn't have the educational background. They might have talent, raw talent, but they needed mentors. So, I mean, that was our approach from the beginning, and it worked. I mean, we would hire an international worker, and we would probably be able to hire somewhere between 3 and 5, depending on the discipline, 3 and 5 juniors locally. Local meaning the region, not necessarily just PEI. And the same model we used in Newfoundland and Labrador too. Yeah, I mean, that worked. And, you know, those juniors have been with us, many of them, or it's still in the industry in the region, you know, 10, 15 years. So they're not juniors anymore.
Right. Yeah. But it's so important, right, for industry and academia to work together, to work collaboratively as you grow, whether it's an emerging industry or an existing industry.
Yes.
Because for the academics, it's vital that you give them the experiential learning opportunity so the students can actually touch it and feel it and be a part of it. And for the industry, I mean, quite frankly, you're getting first look at the talent and you're actually helping educate them in a fashion that suits your needs, right?
In the early days, I did have success with some of the educational institutions, but I didn't with others. And I'm not just talking about in Newfoundland and Labrador, I'm talking about in the region as a whole. I mean, I was talking schools in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia as well. And certainly there were some that were great, but there were others that were awful. And all you would hear would be, you know, well, you just don't understand how it works, and the red tape and the this and the that, and just this unwillingness to work with industry. Like industry was the bad guy, business was the bad guy. Nobody wanted to talk about the fact that students want a job at the end of everything, you know, like it was just, it was a rough go with many. And then I heard Frank McKenna speak here in PEI, I think it was for the chamber or something. And he was talking about the sort of ivory tower issue. And he was specifically talking, I mean, I didn't know what he was going to be talking about. You know, I bought a ticket, it was Frank McKenna. So I went and this is what he happened to talk about. And he talked about how well certain industries had done in various parts of the US. Specifically, he was talking about the US, where there had been a notable change in an educational institute where they had engaged industry and business.
Right.
And so it was like this, it wasn't so much an aha moment for me, but it was like, it's Frank McKenna. I felt like I had the license now to say that this was a problem and to say it out loud.
Yeah.
And I also got involved with the Conference Board of Canada around that same time. And I got involved with a group. I was the only business person in a group that was made up of all academics, provosts and university presidents from across the country. And I learned more about them too, you know, and so there was an understand, they seemed to really respect the issues that I had, and I understood a bit more about the problems that they faced.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we've seen a remarkable change. Well, like I say, it's been good in PEI anyway, but in Newfoundland and Labrador, we've got a wonderful relationship now with Memorial and with the College of the North Atlantic. And I shouldn't say that we didn't have a good relationship. We just weren't able to affect change. And but I feel that those organizations or those institutions have come a long way in the experiences that I've had with them. I mean, maybe it was different for other companies or in other sectors, but they've come a real long way.
Yeah, and I tend to agree that the academic, well, I mean, of course, the Holland colleges of the world, the colleges of the North, those folks are going to adapt as industry needs require, and they're very good at it. The universities are a little slower to maneuver, for sure, but I sense they're coming along as well. Although I must admit, COVID has caused me to kind of rethink my philosophy around that. I found that many of the big universities in Canada have been slow to adjust to the COVID model, and but I think that they'll all learn from that in the fullness of time. But
can I just say one thing there? Yeah. About my own experience. So I went to Ryerson back when it was a Polytechnical Institute. I mean, it had university status, but it was still called Ryerson Polytechnical Institute, and did radio and television, and it was a degree program, but it was very, it was the degree was a Bachelor of Applied Arts, and almost all of our instructors were in the industry. Yes. They worked for private radio and television stations, or they worked for the CBC, and they were all, quite well known in the Toronto area. And that was my university experience.
Right.
There were only 100 that entered the program each year. It was a very difficult program to get into, and I don't know how many of the 100 graduated, but certainly not all of them, because I can remember several that didn't go through the whole thing. So let's say 80 of us graduated, and we did internships. I would go back to Newfoundland and Labrador, and I would work. I worked at Oz and NTV in the summers there, and I mean, that was my university experience, which I know is so very different than most. And but Ryerson was really ahead of its time with regard to that, right? So this would have been, early mid 80s. And so for me, talking to universities, I was kind of shocked. I mean, I only have an undergrad. That was all I kind of knew, right?
Yeah.
So in those early days, I was so shocked to see this, this sort of hardcore no to having industry involvement, because I was trying to get our company involved in looking at people's projects and helping them out, and wouldn't it be great if we did this? I mean, I just thought everyone would love this stuff, right? But they didn't want us sticking our nose in.
Yeah.
But we do that stuff all the time now. It's much, much better.
Right. It's funny how quickly you form a lens to look at something through, right? Your lens was a Ryerson model, which I would argue a vast majority of universities aren't there yet. What you just described from the 80s, but it's very interesting. And so I think we all agree of that importance of the collaboration between the academic institutions and industry to solve real problems for real people along the way. Tell me about your feeling about where government fits in that, because I've always felt that there's parts for three in the mix, right? There's government, academia, and industry, and the three pillars kind of need to work together. I found personally, government is great to spark the initiative, to get things moving in the right direction, give a little bit of an engine to get things moving. And then I've always felt that government needs to step out of the way and let it evolve as it must. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I mean, government has been great at bringing us together. But not necessarily remaining at the table. I'm not sure that they need to be there for that or should be. But yeah, I mean, I basically agree with what you just said. I mean, great to be the sort of organizer and help facilitate. But then to let,
Yeah, it's
Well, the risk comes from industry. The government and academia won't have any of the risk,
Yeah.
right?
yeah, it's I find, you know, I look at all the different government programs that are happening right now, particularly around innovation and all of these things, and while it's all very appealing and it's a great approach for Canada, I find that it's very clunky. It's still very slow moving, still very bureaucratic. So small companies that want to avail themselves of government funding and things like that often get caught into a cycle of applications and all this kind of the very things I don't think that they can afford to put energy into while they're trying to grow their company. So I find it's not perfect, but it's certainly a pretty good model that we have in Canada of how we all effectively work together. And back to the initial point, I think Prince Edward Island is the gold standard of that. And again, it comes down to the size. We are small, therefore we're able to pull all the players to the table quickly and be agile in our approach. We're very, I mean, you know, I've always said, and other people have said in the past, that the advantage of Prince Edward Island is our size, and we need to take advantage of that. And sometimes I think we lose sight of that. But Newfoundland is not much bigger.
No,
Newfoundland
no.
is not much bigger. Right?
Does
I don't-
PEI have an incubator like Memorial's Genesis Center? Is there an
Yeah.
incubator?
Yep,
There is?
startup zone. Yeah, it's different. It's quite different the way it operates, but yes, they
Okay.
do. Yep.
Yeah.
Interesting. You know, I got a question in terms of, you know, someone like yourself, Beep, and, you know, your brother Andrew. You know, I think about Atlantic Canada and how many people across the world that have roots in Atlantic Canada that have done well. But it's curious to me as to why someone would want to risk their capital. They've done well elsewhere. What is one of the biggest motivators, would you say, to getting another business going? Because frankly, you could passively let your capital grow and just make that happen. You know, what are the motivators that get you up and moving on this?
Well, in our case, I mean, honestly, there was just a genuine, you know, a genuine emotional attachment to the place and Andrew was prepared to I wouldn't say certainly to invest his money, but to partner to invest his money. I mean, I'm not sure we would have done it if we hadn't had, you know, government financial support too, because like you say, we were developing an industry in the region. And I should be clear, there were some other companies set up. There were a couple in Nova Scotia. There was actually one in PEI before us too. But in our sector, obviously, I mean, but yeah, he genuinely believed that, you know, I mean, people are the same everywhere. I mean, the raw talent was there. He also, speaking of Newfoundland in particular, you know, he knew we have a disproportionate amount of creative genius in Newfoundland and Labrador. And I mean, you only need to look at at the abundance of Newfoundland and Labrador entertainers that are so successful across the country and in the world, right? And I mean, he knew that, right? He knew that, and ours is a creative business as much as it is a technical one. He also knew that we had deep engineering and technical roots in Newfoundland. When you look at the engineering program at MUN, I mean, it may not have been, or just engineering and development in general, especially in ocean tech, right? So, you know, he believed that those sort of fundamentals were there, and that we just needed the support financially to bring it all together. And you know, a lot of pieces had to come together, but he felt that the pieces were there. They were just sort of all over the place, and I, you know, he believed that I was the person to do that. He knew that I had this a deep-rooted passion, overused word, I know, but passion for the place, and you know, when I went away to university, I came home. He didn't, right? Like I had a different thing going on. And yeah, I mean, the place to, I'd say Atlantic Canada in general, particularly Newfoundland and Labrador, you know, has a affinity to itself, right? I mean, we all know that thing that's inside us that always makes us want to go home in some way or another. Now, he didn't see himself moving back from California or anything, although he's here now in PEI, but I think there was a little bit of something in him that was like, you know, until he built something at home, did he really make it, you know?
What is it?
Isn't it?
It is amazing.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Alan.
And he
That's
did,
cool.
and he didn't necessarily want to I mean, he was there in the background doing it, but he wanted me to do it, you know, but he wanted to be a part of it. And so it was great. And it was wonderful for us to be able to come together and do something together. And we work really well together. So
what is it about Atlantic Canadians that make them want, what is that pull towards this place? I mean, maybe it's the same in Thunder Bay. Maybe they can't wait to get home. I don't know, but it just seems like in Atlantic Canada, there's such a passion for where we come from. And even if we leave the place, our heart is still there. We're so excited to tell people about it and where we come from. And it's a hard thing to articulate, but can you tell me why there's such a draw? What's your draw?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I love to travel. I love to spend time in other places. I don't know, but there's something for sure.
For me, I think it feels safe and you feel content in Atlantic Canada. And I think the contentment surrounds itself or is because we surround ourselves by people that, in my opinion, we're pretty level people. Like we keep things pretty level. We don't take things all that serious. We're not extreme left or right or anything like that. We're just a content people. And to me, that's what I find appealing.
Well, I think it's a deep cultural connection, right? And I mean, if you look at lots of cultures across the world, they have, they are deeply passionate about the place that they come from. And I mean, you can meet a person with Greek roots on the Danforth in Toronto who hasn't actually lived in Greece, and they seem more Greek than if you go there on a vacation, So I think I remember somebody said to me one time, well, we really come from somewhere. And I think what that really means is just the strong culture of the place and why that's, why that's present in Atlantic Canada and maybe not so much in other places. I mean, maybe it is because of hardship, or maybe it's because of, some amount of isolation, or I don't know, but there's certainly other cultures in the world who have that strong sense of where they come from, right? That remains with them even when they're not there, for that draw of the homeland kind of thing. So it's something with the deep-rooted culture. And
100%. There certainly are people, but I mean, I spent my whole career in the Navy surrounded by people from all across this country.
Mm.
I don't know, something about Newfoundlanders that there was something different. They were connected in a different way to their community.
Yeah, well, it's a nationhood thing. Yeah.
But Alan, I'll tell you, I'll never forget this story just quickly. I mean, Alan and I started in the Navy together in 84, 85, whatever it was. But I get into a Esquimalt and we're at Albert Head. Alan knows these places. But anyway, I'm there and this guy comes over to me and he said, you Jerry Carew? Yeah. And he starts looking me up and down and he says, great. And I said, what do you mean great? He said, well, I've never met a Newfoundlander before. I had to have a look for myself. And I swear to God, I'm still 40 years later, just absolutely blown away by that experience. And that happened time after time after time. For some reason, unique, Alan.
My story of meeting a Newfoundlander in BC is a little bit different. So let me tell you this story, Beep. You'll get a kick out of this. I just went out west and I was on board a ship, and this was in as Jerry would say, the mid '80s. And the ship pulled into Vancouver, and we went ashore in Vancouver. And as I was walking down the street, this guy yelled at me. I'm a kid from St. John's in Vancouver. Guy's yelling my name. I turned around. The guy I went to school with, Gonzaga. So
Right.
we went out. We had a couple of beers and stuff like that. I took him back to the ship at the end of the night, and I went back to my cabin. And at the time, where I situated the guy was in the officer's mess, and it was just a curtain separating the officer's mess and where the captain was asleep on the ship. And I went back to my cabin, and I came back. And when I came back, I could smell marijuana. This guy's lit up a joint in the officer's mess back in the 80s. I thought he couldn't smoke. I thought my career was over. It's all okay now, but my story was a little less romantic than yours, Jerry.
Well, you know, not to one up you, I'll tell you one more story. So we're in Anacortes, Washington. So when you're an officer cadet, you're the lowest of the low. My job was to take the garbage off the YAG, it's called. So as soon as the boat comes up and I'm going with the garbage, this man comes up to me, goes, "Any Newfs on board?" We're in a place called Anacortes, Washington, which is it's like, I'll show you on a map sometime. Like, you know, it is like remote. Remote Washington State. Any Newfs on board? Turns out he's from Stephenville. I knew all kinds of people from Stephenville. It was a bizarre conversation, and that's happened to me multiple times.
But, that speaks to your brother, right? Reaching out and making that connection. And it's funny how we tend to find ourselves. So, Beep, you know, Newfoundland is at a decision point here within the next few days, right? They're in the middle of a provincial election. The province, I would say there's some turmoil economically and stuff like that. But yet, aside from that, there's quite a bright future in the tech industry and stuff. I mean, things are happening. An incredible purchase by NASDAQ of Verifin just recently. I mean, things are Kraken Robotics, another incredible company with incredible technology, Provincial Airlines, and all of their the companies that have spun off of that. Incredible stuff happening in Newfoundland. Where do you see the direction of Newfoundland going in the next 6 months, year or so? Because you've got interest in both, right?
Yeah, some serious problems for sure.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to be the one trying to figure that out. But I certainly think that what's happening in the technology sector in Newfoundland and Labrador right now has a very bright future. Is it big enough to deal with the problems that we have? I don't think any of us know that, right? I don't have the crystal ball for that. I know we have to do something about the declining population. I know that immigration is the short-term solution for that. We need to be super aggressive in that regard, far more aggressive than we have been. And I mean that in every way, you know, whether it's finding people, whether it's keeping people, making them feel at home, whether it's hanging on international students that are coming and then leaving, whether it's supporting the companies that are actually hiring these people to make sure that they have all the tools and help that they need for retention. And then, of course, the longer term solutions are when it comes to our sector and the issues that we have, and making sure that that reach our full potential is in making sure that the curriculum matches up with the jobs that are available. And that's a pretty daunting task. And for a government that doesn't have very much money, but that has jurisdiction over education, that's another problem, right? So I know the areas that need to be fixed I'm not entirely sure how we fix them, but I am encouraged that I'm seeing people come together. I mean, some of the engagement that I've had with government over and, reaching out to me and asking for my expertise on things and others in our sector. And, it gives me hope, but there's a big job to do. And we certainly need to be looking more too at, when I talk about education, we need to be looking at the engagement of girls in marginalized groups. And no one's been able to fix that, it seems to me.
Yeah.
And that to me seems fixable.
Right.
And it's good, but that takes a long time, right? Yeah. So, and we don't, companies don't have a long time. You got your project now, so you need to have the short-term solutions, like I mentioned, and then you need to have the longer vision, and we need to get at it.
Yeah, well, I think the first step is identifying the challenges, right? At least understanding where the challenges are, and then at least you can start focusing energy around them. But that's a great way to kind of summarize. Beep, we always ask our guests to leave the audience with one small takeaway, and everything that we've talked about and everything that you've experienced across the globe and in our small region in Atlantic Canada. What would be that one piece of advice that you would give somebody to take away from this conversation here today?
I don't know if it would be advice so much, but one thing that I always try and make sure that I leave with people is just that, you can do what we do here, and there are lots of other sectors like ours that you wouldn't imagine you can do here, but you can. I mean, there are lots of different supports out there to help people. You mentioned the Genesis Center earlier, but I like to make sure that kids know that these opportunities are here for them in the region, and that they don't. I certainly encourage people to see the world, and in non-COVID days, and see the world and experience that, and bring home those experiences. But if you want to live, down the street from your mom and have a meaningful job, you can. And there are companies out there, or you can do it yourself if you have that vision. But you need to reach out to the supports. There's lots there.
And that's perfect. And that, in essence, summarizes why we started this whole podcast, is to show to people that you can. We call it thriving in remoteness, but you're right. You can do what you can do right here, and there's something about it too, because there's that social piece as well that I find fascinating. Jerry, your thoughts to end it?
Well, I just want to say thank you. I have two nieces, both of which live in Halifax. My sister moved away, must be 20 years ago. I've lost track of how long she's been gone, but she has two beautiful nieces living in Halifax, and I hope they watch this podcast, because Beep, you are a role model, an entrepreneur. When you get up in the morning and your foot hits the floor, obviously you have an agenda and a plan, and you just keep going. I'm sure there were times when you wonder, how do I put my right foot ahead of my left foot? But, it's just a pleasure talking to someone who's created something like you have. So I'm going to say it, what Alan usually says, but I'm going to say it. The world needs more Deirdre Ayre.
Aw, that's awfully sweet. Thank you.
Thank you, Beep. Hopefully we'll run into you in Prince Edward Island.
Absolutely. I'm sure we will. Take care. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to Gale Force Wins. That's Gale Force Wins, WINS.com.